So, Minnesota also has a defensive coordinator issue at hand where it's, vacant. And yesterday I touched base on an offensive coordinator possibility with Rick Dennison. So I got a defensive coordinator one that's a little bit out of the box, as where Dennison was definitely like, oh, that's pretty safe. But this one also is a Kubiak connection as well. A little bit more interesting given that, this is a defensive thing. But Wade Phillips. He worked with him for 5 years as his defensive coordinator. And the thing I would point out that perhaps this means more than some would think is that there are certain defenses that marry up with certain offenses a little better. So, yeah. Like if you have an offense like what Arizona's trying to run down there, it's going to be a lot of throwing, which means you need a lot of pass rushers because in the ideal world where that works, obviously you're going to be scoring a lot because you're throwing more, which means you're up by more, which means they have to throw more, which means you need pass rushers to stop that. So, things like that. So, that being said, this defense is ranked really, really well over the course of that time with Gary Kubiak, where the only year they even allowed a percentage at 60 or above with him there, like passing, was in 2015 with Denver, which was at 60. That's the best. So, yeah. The average season, though, like total yards per game, 305.1, yards per play, 4.8, third down percentage, 35, 199.2 passing yards a game allowed, 55.9%, 22 touchdowns to 13 interceptions, 43 sacks, 78.3 quarterback rating, 105.9 rush yards, allowed 4 yards per carry, got roughly 2 touchdowns a season through interceptions, 16 forced fumbles and 11 fumble recoveries, and allowed 22 points per game on average. And just so, once again, we put this in perspective, I have ranked this for how 2019 went. That 305.1 would have been 6th in the league, 4.8 yards per play would have been 4th, third down percentage at 35% would have been 6th, passing yards per game at 199.2 would have been 5th, 55.9% would have been 1st, 22 touchdowns allowed would have been 12th, 13 interception, also 12th, 43 sacks would have been 13th, 78.3 quarterback rating, which would have been 3rd, 105.9 yards rushing per game allowed would have been 13th, yards per carry at just an even 4.0, 7th, and if you're going off that 2 touchdowns per season mark there, for this season that would have been 4th, forced fumbles would have been 8th, fumble recoveries would have been 7th, and points per game would have been 15th at 22. Now, Minnesota's actual defense was allowed 341.6 yards a game, which is 14th, so that's 8 spots lower. 5.2 yards per play is 10th, not bad, but still 6 spots lower than that 4.8 mark that was the average for the Wade Phillips under the Kubiak offense. Third down percentage, 35% versus 40 for the Zimmer defense in that, which that's a difference of 13 ranks there. That 5%. So, yeah. Because that ranked 6th, Minnesota ranked 19th. Passing yards per game, like I said, 199.2 for Wade Phillips average. Last year for Minnesota, it was 233.6, which was 15th, so that's 10 spots lower than Wade's. 65.6% allowed is 27th. Obviously, 55.9, I already said, would have been 1st. Touchdowns allowed was 23, which would have been 13th. Compares pretty well to Wade's 22, which would have been 12th. 17 interceptions was 3rd this year for Minnesota, as 13 would have just been 12. Sacks, 48 for Minnesota would have been 5th. 43 for Wade would have been 13th. Quarterback rating, 86.1 for Minnesota was 10th in the league, but that 78.3 from Wade Phillips would have been 3rd. The 105.9 rushing yards would have been 13th. Minnesota did rank 13th with 108 yards per game allowed. Yards per carry for Minnesota, 4.3, which was 18th. Yards per carry for Wade, 4, which is 7. The forced fumbles, I feel like is probably a better stat to use because, some safeties and things like that are, circumstantial. But forced fumbles on average, like I said, 16 for Wade. That would have ranked 8th. Minnesota had 19 this year, which was 4. Wade had an average of 11 recoveries, which would have been 7th. Minnesota had 14 this year, which was 5th. And points per game, 18.9, which was 5th for Minnesota this year. And obviously 22 at 15. That's a 10-spot difference. Now, I bring this up because I feel like this is a very interesting guy to potentially bring into the building because he actually brings in a whole different scheme. He brings in a 3-4 scheme. It's a lot more blitzing. It's a more aggressive look to it. And I think this would make Minnesota very multiple on defense because there's one way you can look at no, that doesn't work with Zimmer. I would like to look at this if these two can, this is a big if, if they can work in harmony, this could really be an interesting and very complicated defense. And because, like I said, Wade does like to play more aggressively than Zimmer does, usually. And if you bring in these two defensive minds that have been very respected throughout the courses of their careers, you could potentially create a juggernaut. Although there is the possibility of this thing being a dumpster fire. But I would like to mention a thing. Zimmer said he was on the phone for an hour with Bill Parcells. You may have heard of him. Just asking how to get over the hump, as they say. So, what did Parcells get? Belichick as his defensive coordinator. And so could Wade Phillips potentially be of similar impact of, it's hard to say because you don't want to throw anyone's name in with Belichick, I know that. But I just mean in terms of, can this be his version of it? You know what I mean? Because Bill Parcells and Mike Zimmer are both defensive guys. So the fact that, he had to bring in another great defensive mind to come in and help him actually win a Super Bowl might not be a bad idea to go out and just copy and paste this same ideology, especially one where you have an in-house connection with a bunch of guys that have worked with him. You kind of know his ins and outs, so to speak, if you really wanted to know them. And I know there are a lot of people going out there with Adam Zimmer, he's the one that's kind of been thrown out there a lot. So I was like, what other options do we have? And this one intrigued me by far the most because you do have an in-house connection, albeit on offense, but he's really good at his job. He just got canned, so he's available. And yeah, this could be something that could actually bring in a whole bunch of benefits. Now, would it be too many people in, too many chefs in the kitchen? Okay, that was bad. But I think you guys know what I mean. Is it too many people? Just thinking if you could have the problem that we thought we might have last year with Stefanski with Kubiak coming in, or it's just a bunch of people saying no, this is my job. I want this to be done my way. So I don't know if this would be a similar problem potentially. I hope not. In my mind, I feel like we can mix everything together, potentially, and just see if it works or not, because if it did work, I think we could very well see a top 5 unit at least in this defense next season. So I would like to know what you guys think down in the comments below, if this is, too far out there. But I thought it would be interesting to talk about. Liking and subscribing, always a helpful thing to do. And until next time, I bid you all adieu.